There was a time when The Undertaker versus Bill Goldberg would have been a really big deal. These were two titans of a bygone era, an era where everyone was watching pro wrestling, and an era where the hot topic in the business centered around Monday nights and the battle between both men's respective employers. I'm not saying Taker versus Goldberg was a dream match or anything like that. It was always Sting versus Taker and Steve Austin versus Goldberg that fans would discuss, but that doesn't take away from the fact that at one point both The Undertaker and Goldberg were main eventing episodes of Raw and Nitro, and they were two big draws for their companies during the fabled Monday Night Wars. I think 1998 would have been the prime year for a potential Undertaker versus Goldberg match if the impossible happened and WCW and the WWF co-promoted shows. It was never gonna happen, and I know it was never gonna happen, but just for the sake of fantasy booking, 1998 was the year Goldberg became unstoppable while the Deadman was throwing dudes off the top of sales and slowly morphing into a much more sinister version of his character towards the end of the year. That was then though, and that was when both guys were on top of their game, and that's when fan interest would have been at an all-time high. Almost 20 years later, the WWE decided to book the match for one of their Saudi Arabia shows, Super Showdown 2019, and the match was absolutely destroyed by fans and critics, while The Undertaker himself called it almost catastrophic. We all quickly learned that having these one-off dream matches from titans of the past may not always be the best idea when things went south very early on. And, you know, in a way, both guys' legacies also suffered a little due to the match taking place. Let's see how it all went down. This is the Goldberg vs Undertaker match at Super Showdown 2019. The Saudi Arabia shows that the WWE now produce involve a lot of money, and it's no secret that the company and the wrestlers who perform are paid very handsomely for these trips to the Middle East. There's been quite a lot of debate about these shows, and it's not something I want to discuss in today's video, but I do believe that Goldberg vs Undertaker wouldn't have happened if the Saudi shows didn't exist. There seems to be a desire to put on big, surprising matches at these events, and who requests these matches doesn't really matter. All we need to know is that the opportunity presented itself for Goldberg to wrestle The Undertaker in 2019 overseas, and both guys agreed to do the match. Taker's last match before Super Showdown was at Crown Jewel 2018, another event that was held in Saudi Arabia, and a match that also featured the return of Shawn Michaels. The Brothers of Destruction took on D-Generation X in a match that can only be described as disappointing, but I plan on covering that one in the future. The brothers took a loss on this night, and the bout received quite a lot of criticism for various reasons, but honestly, it was nowhere near the match people thought it was gonna be. Taker himself described it as a train wreck and a total disaster. At this time, The Undertaker was a little obsessed about having one good match before retiring for good, so he was continuing to wrestle sporadically at big events even when his body was telling him it was time to let it go. Taker did not appear at WrestleMania 35, breaking a long-term WrestleMania tradition due to Vince not booking him on the show and instead deciding to have Taker appear the next night on Raw. But The Undertaker said that he felt he should have been part of WrestleMania and he should have been in the ring during the event. And when watching Taker's Last Ride documentary, you can absolutely tell how disappointed he was with not being part of the show. Still, Taker appeared on Raw the next night and he took out Elias. He got backstage and he talked about how excited he was for this next Saudi Arabia show. Taker was gonna wrestle once again and he wanted to get redemption for the D-Generation X match. Bill Goldberg had become a special attraction in World Wrestling Entertainment since coming back in 2016. Fans weren't overly enamored with Goldberg becoming the Universal Champion the following year, and fans who didn't live through the Goldberg streak during WCW's heyday couldn't see what the big deal was with Bill Goldberg. To be fair, there were also fans from the 90s who didn't care all that much about Bill, but nonetheless, he got great ovations to start with, but the novelty wore off for a lot of people by the time Bill dropped the Universal title to Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 33. The following year, Goldberg was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, with many people thinking he had now retired from in-ring competition for good. It isn't always a rule of the thumb, of course, but generally speaking, a wrestler would hang up their boots after getting their induction. To be fair to Goldberg, and to not jump on the "he only did it for the money" bandwagon, he did state previously that he could wrestle again in the future, and he never flat out said he was retired. But the Saudi show he and Taker would wrestle at may have already been in the pipeline, who knows. Goldberg's a guy though that I feel modern fans rip into way too much, and I think a lot of his criticisms are unjustified. He's not the one booking the matches, and he's not the one telling people he wants to win championships. Yes, it's disheartening seeing an older guy completely destroy younger talent when we all know he's going to disappear again very soon, but that's really on the guys that write the shows. We also hear a lot that Goldberg's too limited in the ring and his matches are too short. Trust me, what we want to see is short Goldberg matches. Only a select few have been able to carry Goldberg to longer, more involved matches. His high impact, intense and adrenaline-fueled encounters that end in a matter of minutes were always the most fun to watch, and those kind of matches were exactly what worked for Bill. I get it too, wrestling fans have moved on and wrestling has moved on. I said before that the format of WCW Nitro and the quick pace of WCW Nitro really suited Goldberg's style as a character and an in-ring performer, but wrestling had evolved when Goldberg came back to WWE in 2016, and fans didn't necessarily demand more in my opinion, but they were used to main eventers having long and epic encounters at the end of shows. It can be argued that Goldberg's main strengths as a performer didn't really fit in with this new era of pro wrestling. Undertaker said it was Triple H who called him and asked if he would like to wrestle Goldberg in Saudi Arabia. Taker thought it sounded like a great match on paper, and at this juncture of his career, he wouldn't have many more opportunities to work with someone of that magnitude for the first time ever. Taker was excited for the match. I'm sure he was excited for the money too, but he said he was excited that the match built itself with the names of the competitors being all that was needed to draw fans in. And Goldberg was excited to give fans in a different country a look at the old Bill Goldberg. Taker was absolutely right too. There was practically no build-up for the match whatsoever. The match was announced on TV. Taker made an appearance on the June 3rd, 2019 episode of Raw. Goldberg and Taker then shared the ring briefly on the following episode of SmackDown, and that was pretty much it. It's crazy. On Raw, the dead man asked fans if they knew what it was like to come face to face with death for the first time, because that's exactly what Goldberg's going to go through later in the week. Taker said he doesn't want to see the family man Goldberg that's been showing up to WWE recently. The Phenom wants the unstoppable mythical icon. He wants the old Bill Goldberg. And if Bill brings anything less, then this first match between he and the Phenom is going to be his last. Taker then says he plans on claiming Goldberg's soul for all eternity, and he ends the promo by saying Goldberg's next. On SmackDown, Goldberg said he's waited nearly 20 years to experience what it would be like to share the ring with The Undertaker, and he's finally going to get what he wants later this week at Super Showdown. He appreciates Undertaker's advice in regarding to leaving the family man behind. Goldberg says he doesn't want the family man anywhere near Taker because he'd probably fall short. So Bill does indeed plan on leaving that family man at home. Goldberg guarantees that The Undertaker's going to get the guy who the Phenom watched for 20 years. The Goldberg that made The Undertaker wonder, would I be able to stack up against that? The ass-kicking Goldberg that Undertaker requested is exactly what The Undertaker's going to get, because The Undertaker's next to rest in peace. The lights then go out in the arena, and when they come back on, the Phenom's standing there right behind Goldberg. Goldberg laughs as he turns around. The Undertaker forces his opponent to look at death right in the eye, and Goldberg doesn't back down. The lights go off again, and the Undertaker's vanished. Goldberg appreciates the showmanship, and he tells Taker to bring his jockstrap and tighten it up because this Friday, Undertaker's in for a ride. So the theme heading into this show in Saudi Arabia is all about these two legends of the past finally colliding in an epic encounter, with The Undertaker wanting the old Goldberg and Goldberg saying his WCW run was something that made Taker question his own abilities. In a different time and maybe in a different place, this could have been something, but you gotta call a spade here too. The incredibly short build-up and the WWE trying to build this like the pinnacle of both men's careers simply didn't work because there was simply no time nor effort put into the journey. Taker and Goldberg spoke of unstoppable careers and turning back the clock for this epic one-time only battle, but the WWE simply had no interest in selling the story to their viewers. For fans of Goldberg in the 90s, there could have been something here. For fans of the Monday Night War, there was definitely more story to explore, but the build-up was totally rushed and it felt like the WWE just wanted to deliver on a match commitment and then call it a day. With how the match turned out though, it was probably for the best. The bad match would have been seriously amplified if WWE took a few months to tell a story between these, let's admit it, aging superstars. But it's quite shocking how little was put into the build-up we got, and this is a fine example of why many fans feel the Saudi shows aren't canon. If you completely skip WWE television the week beginning June the 3rd, 2009, then you'd be absolutely none the wiser in regards to Taker versus Goldberg from both a build-up and match perspective. Nothing advanced before that week, and nothing changed after that week. Taker versus Goldberg's the final match of the night, and Goldberg's entrance is up first. Before the security guards open up his locker room door, Goldberg headbutts it as usual, but then Bill walks out and we can see a cut on his forehead. As he continues walking down the corridor, his eyes get more and more bloodshot. Bill would reveal on the Pat McAfee show that he gave himself a concussion by headbutting that door, and he didn't know where he was and he had no idea what was going on as he made his entrance to face The Undertaker. He gets to the ring and by this time he does seem a little bit better. I sure didn't notice anything wrong here except the bloodshot eyes, but I just put that down to tiredness after the flight. And of course the cut on his head was unmissable, but he gets in the ring and he awaits the dead man. I know a lot of people won't watch these shows out of principle, and that's completely up to you, but if you didn't see Super Showdown, then you honestly missed one of The Undertaker's better entrances, complete with torch-carrying druids, a line of 20 coffins, flames shooting up into the night sky, and Undertaker appearing from these lights that look like some sort of portal. The two are now in the ring. They square up to each other. Goldberg tells Taker it's time to rest in peace. Undertaker punches Goldberg, and we immediately see the spear. Goldberg lines up another spear, trying to end this one as early as possible. He hits it, but The Undertaker kicks out, and it looks like Bill's going to have to do a little more work. The dead man sits up and he manages to get Goldberg in position for a choke slam, but Goldberg rolls through and he locks in a knee bar. This stays in for a little while and things so far haven't been all that bad. It then goes downhill rapidly when Goldberg charges at the dead man. The Undertaker dodges the attack and Goldberg smacks his head on the ring post, busting him wide open while concussing Goldberg once again. Now, again, to be fair to Goldberg, ever since he came back to WWE, the company had been using these bigger LED ring posts that you see right here. Sometimes they had VR cameras attached to them, other times they were used purely for cosmetic reasons. But Goldberg did state that the ring setup was slightly different for this Saudi show, and I think he was directly referring to the ring posts. It's an excuse, I know, but keep in mind Goldberg didn't wrestle as much as everyone else, and also keep in mind he already messed himself up before making it to the ring and he probably didn't notice the ring post until it was way too late. Anyway, Goldberg's now bleeding badly and the look in his eyes tells us he's pretty much out on his feet. He tries to bring the fight to Taker and he's got his wits about him enough to allow Undertaker to perform old school, but the referee is checking on him immediately afterwards. Goldberg said that he told the referee a few times that he was fine, but then seconds later he would wonder how he ended up in a wrestling ring. Taker signals for the chokeslam, but Goldberg turns his back to rest on the top rope. You can hear Mike Chioda again ask Goldberg if he's okay, and the dead man has to stall a little before going for the chokeslam. Goldberg takes the move. Taker looks directly at Chioda, maybe looking for further instruction. Undertaker hits the tombstone, and this was Goldberg's chance to stay down if he was unable to continue, but Bill kicks out at 2. It isn't even a long 2 count. He's back on his feet before the Undertaker. Still, watch that tombstone back in slow motion or frame by frame and you'll see Goldberg take all the impact on his head. The dead man lays in a few right hands and he brings his opponent to the corner. Even Corey Graves says Goldberg's just running on instinct at the moment as it becomes clearer and clearer that he's not all there. Taker continues to gingerly attack Goldberg while trying to give him time in between strikes to get his wits about him. Goldberg gets launched into the ropes and both men go down after a double clothesline. The two then trade punches with Undertaker getting the upper hand. Goldberg then takes Snake Eyes and the Undertaker lines up his jumping clothesline, but Goldberg counters with a spear. Bill then signals for the jackhammer and then this happens.
No way Goldberg's gonna be able to do this to the Undertaker!
No way!
Oh my God!
This was scary and it could have been so much worse. Luckily, Goldberg's bicep provided enough cushion for the Undertaker's neck, but still, that amount of weight being placed on the neck and shoulders combined with the age of the Undertaker and his mounting injuries really could have led to an absolute disaster, but thankfully he was okay. Goldberg covers Taker after the botched jackhammer, but the Phenom kicks out. Goldberg then goes for a tombstone, but he doesn't have the strength to lift Taker up, and there's a complete hush over the stadium here. This was bad. With mercy, the Undertaker hits a chokeslam and Goldberg can't even jump up at this point. Taker wins via pinfall, and the look on the Undertaker's face afterwards says it all. This match was not the redemption Undertaker was seeking after the D-Generation X match. This was even worse than the DX match. Undertaker said he felt frustrated, disappointed, and worried. He described the botched jackhammer like an electrical charge that went through his whole body, setting off all nerve impulses to all his current injuries at once, and he said the move was just a few small inches from being absolutely catastrophic. Undertaker stayed relatively silent about the match until the Last Ride documentary aired on WWE Network. Goldberg took to social media to explain what happened. He felt he let his fans down, yet he also acknowledged that fans wanted to see him fail. Goldberg then admitted that he thought about the match way too much and he was worried about the Undertaker match defining his whole career. He wanted to have another shot in order to redeem himself, and he would end up doing just that. For The Undertaker though, things weren't so straightforward. The Phenom was already coming to terms with his own career coming to an end, and he was already questioning if he should keep going even before Super Showdown. But after the Goldberg match, the dead man found himself in a real bad spot both physically and mentally. He came out of the match with some serious back pain, and during the flight home, he wondered if it was time to finally give it all up. He thought about his wife and he thought about his children. He wasn't sure if he was to blame for what happened at Super Showdown, and he wondered if things wouldn't have went the way they did if he was still the Undertaker of old. So the Goldberg bout ended up giving the Phenom a lot to think about when he got back to the States. He'd already agreed to wrestle in the Extreme Rules pay-per-view later in the year, and he thought it might be best to cancel the match. Taker, being the company man he is, ended up working the Extreme Rules pay-per-view in the end, a tag team match where he teamed up with Roman Reigns to battle Drew McIntyre and Shane McMahon, and the match turned out pretty damn good. But Taker told Vince McMahon after the match that the time had come and he was ready to say goodbye to WWE. Both guys would go on to get their redemption in singles bouts, with Goldberg having a much better match against Dolph Ziggler, though he did end up defeating The Fiend at Super Showdown 2020 for the Universal Belt, giving Goldberg even more criticism to deal with. And as for Undertaker, he would face AJ Styles in a Boneyard match. That match has an interesting story in itself, as the WWE done their best to deal with the restrictions placed upon the company due to the coronavirus pandemic. I'll cover that match in the future for sure, but in short, the dead man ended up very happy with the Boneyard match and how he quite literally rode off into the night when all was said and done. People love to point the finger at Goldberg and blame him for everything that happened because it's the easy thing to do, but is it really our place as fans to tell the guys in the ring how they're supposed to do their job, you know? Accidents happen, and yes, the Super Showdown match had more than one accident, and that's what makes it stick out like a sore thumb, but we're not the ones in the ring at 53 and 54 years old, dealing with injuries and concussions, trying to lift guys in the air while trying to maintain some sort of resemblance of safety. It was a bad match for sure, one of the worst to ever main event a WWE show, and I know the thing to do is to blame Goldberg for injuring guys and all that stuff, but nobody wants to see guys get hurt or end up in a bad way because of a fucking wrestling match. And yes, I know, people are instantly going to bring up Bret Hart versus Goldberg, and there's a point to be made there too, but in my opinion, the problem with this match was the fact that it got booked in the first place. Goldberg versus Undertaker in 2019 should not have happened. Both guys simply were too far gone at this point to wrestle each other, and both guys needed younger wrestlers to carry the load a little. In 1998 or 1999, fans would have loved to have seen Goldberg versus Undertaker, or Goldberg versus anyone in WWF for that matter. In 2019 though, not so much. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.